This week on Cosmic Sponge, some experts theorize aliens may play a big role in saving us from ourselves in the event of a nuclear war. A demon trapped for 1,000 years escapes from its stone prison on the island of Japan. For our main topic, we look into the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle, including stories from both the air and the sea. Then we look back to the men with nerves of steel from the 1940s.
Captain, this plane's gonna leak fuel like nobody's business. We shouldn't fly it. That's all right, son. Just put up a no smoking sign.
Welcome to Cosmic Sponge, the podcast where we discuss UFOs and other weird wonders in the world. I am Stephen Hawk.
And I'm big man Jimmy Coe.
Big man Jimmy Coe.
Feeling big tonight.
Tonight we are going to be looking into the mysteries of the Bermuda Triangle, sometimes known as the Devil's Triangle, where dozens, hundreds, thousands, perhaps, of ships and planes have disappeared through the centuries. So we're going to dive into that mystery and try to figure out what's going on down there. Before we do that, Jimmy, what you been up to this week, man?
What you been up to, Jimmy? So, this week I've done several things, but none of them as interesting as this news story that I have for you. Many people within the UFO community, according to expert Nick Pope, who previously worked with the Ministry of Defense, has given his views on whether extraterrestrials would intervene if atomic warfare broke out. Now, everybody knows Vladimir Putin has Russia's nuclear force on high alert since the end of February. He's that guy over in Russia who looks scary.
Douchebag.
Yeah, you figure he'd kill your cat with just for fun. I'm actually a dog person, but he'd kill my dogs too, just for fun. He's an evil guy. Anyway, that's my point of view. I'm just saying. Anyway, Nick Pope says there's a wide...
Hey, if you're a fan of Vladimir Putin and you're listening to the show, you can just get the hell out of here.
Step off. So, damn straight. So, Nick Pope says there's a widespread belief in the UFO community that aliens have switched off nuclear devices in the past and would do so again and save us from ourselves. For example, military personnel at United States Air Force Base in Suffolk had claimed they saw a large glowing object, metallic in appearance, adorned with colored lights. Small impressions on the ground were reportedly later found alongside burn marks and broken branches. And they believe that this ship analyzed nuclear bombs stored at that site and turned them off. There are a lot of other cases that we know throughout the history of UFOs in the United States, and it's rumored that also in other countries, such as the USSR, the previous Soviet Union, that they had UFOs that showed up at nuclear sites and turned off the missiles.
Yeah, we've talked about this quite a bit, actually. Now, I'm a little confused here. I remember a few weeks ago, we reported that Nick Pope was saying that aliens probably wouldn't reach out and contact us because we're being uncivilized with this warfare thing going on, right? Do you remember that?
I do.
But then right after that, you said you saw an interview or heard an interview with Nick Pope, and he's saying it's all in the edit. You know, I'm not really a UFO nut or have these beliefs of UFOs.
Yeah, and I think that's the case most of the time. Probably, it's weird. It almost feel like sometimes Nick is playing it both sides.
I think he is.
You know what I mean?
I really do. I mean, I've seen him interviewed, and it's not some edit where he comes right out with just flat out claims that they're aliens, they're from outer space. I mean, just all the things that no one really knows. I think we can all acknowledge there's something odd with flying saucers, UFOs, what have you, these craft. Or objects that are sighted. You pointed out in the Patreon show, on the Weird Wonder show, the airliner, that A380. I mean, what was that? We don't know. It's a lot of speculation to say that they're aliens from another planet and that they may or may not turn off our nuclear equipment. In fact, there is one report out of the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, that they turned on all of their nuclear missiles and actually went into like a high alert status as if they were about to launch just on their own whenever there was UFO sighting over their base.
I just imagine some redneck alien in a UFO going, hold my beer and watch your shit.
You want to see them Earthlings running around like crazy?
It's like shining a magnifying glass down on ants. Watch them run.
Yeah. Well, if they are, who knows what their agenda is.
They didn't stop Nagasaki and Hiroshima.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Well, some would argue that's why they're here, because of that. And that the first
they're in their house.
sightings
Yeah.
with Kevin Arnold in 1947. That's one of the more common theories about flying saucers is they appeared in our skies once we started experimenting with nuclear weapons.
Right. It took them some time to get here. They had to find the keys to their ships, and like, where did I leave those in my other pants, honey? I got to get over to this backwater.
They always
world.
have those skin tight sheen pants,
Yeah. Would they have keys?
Would you know? It's like you really couldn't hide anything in your pockets. I wouldn't.
No, it's just voice activated. They wouldn't have keys.
Looks like spandex or something.
Spandex.
You know what? That is probably. I bet spandex is some recovered alien technology that we got from Roswell. It has to be. It has to be. Think about it.
Those damn aliens created Speedos. You're going to see a banana hammock. Come on.
Yeah, who knows, man? I mean, I don't know that they're space aliens. I don't know if they would intervene if we were getting ready to blow the planet up. Maybe they're waiting for us to blow the planet up, then move in. I don't know. I found one really cool story in Japan. There has been this big stone that is called the Killing Stone. For 1,000 years, it was said to house a terrifying spirit, some kind of evil spirit. So according to mythology, this volcanic rock contained, and if you look at pictures of this rock, it's round, almost egg-shaped in a way. This volcanic rock contained a 9-tailed fox known as the Tamamo-no-Mae. Legend dictates that those who come in contact with the stone, officially called Sessho-seki, will perish. The mystical landmark has become a popular tourist attraction, bringing people from around the globe to the mountains of Tochigi, near Tokyo, famous for its sulfurous hot springs. Folklore says that the stone continuously emits poisonous gas. It is said that the demon once took the form of a beautiful woman who was part of a secret plan to kill Emperor Toba, who ruled Japan from 1107 to 1123. But her true identity was an evil 9-tailed creature whose spirit is in the volcanic rock. Now, I've got some bad news for you. The rock has split open.
Oh, what's inside of it?
Oddly enough, if you look at pictures of it, it looks hollow inside.
Holy
I'm not joking. It's on Facebook. Check it out.
Let's go take a really quick look at this.
Some of the true believers are very worried and upset that this demon is now escaped or is on the loose.
I think that beautiful woman might be a 9-tailed evil spirit. Yeah, I do too, because she smells like sulfur. And then the third guy says, no, I don't think so. I saw her eating a bunch of tacos at lunch. I think she just got gas.
Yeah, there was some Twitter comments that's kind of interesting here. One said, I feel like I've seen something that shouldn't be seen. Another one says, I thought 2022 couldn't get any worse. Now a furious Japanese spirit is freed from its killing stone. And then finally, a third said, my guess is the demon is going to have a look around at 2022 and want to go back into the rock for another millennium. Yeah. So experts believe that rainwater may have gotten inside the rock, caused it to, I guess, expand and contract and crack open. They're actually talking about trying to put it back together.
Yeah, when I hear about that kind of stuff, my knee-jerk reaction is I want to get like a hammer and chisel and go at it. I want to see.
Yeah. There's supposed to be a spirit in here. Let's check it out. Get my sledgehammer, honey.
For sure.
Yeah, they're talking about putting it back together, but I'm kind of like, what's the point? It's like, how's this going to be a tourist attraction now? It's kind of like, oh, for over 1,000 years, there's been this spirit trapped inside this rock. Oh, yeah, except for in 2022, whenever it kind of split open and then we glued it back together again. Now, what would be really cool is if they make some new legend that they bring in like some Japanese monk or some kind of spiritual guy, shaman deal, and did his mysticism and put the thing back in the rock. Now, if they create that kind of legend around the rock, it might be pretty cool.
This is an opportunity to buy a really good fog machine to slide in there too on the side.
Yeah, there you go. A little bit of lighting and stuff.
Yeah. And some weird music.
Look like a white snake concert or something getting ready to happen.
They've trapped Steve Vai inside of a rock.
Steve Vai, man, come on.
Wasn't he in Whitesnake?
Just to be clear, Steve Vai is one of the most awesome guitar players.
What did I think he was in
the world?
Are you sure he was never in Whitesnake?
I don't know. I don't think so. I know he was in David Lee Roth's band. Is where he kind of come to fame. And he was in the movie Crossroads at the end.
Yeah, I remember
Ralph
Crossroads.
Macchio. He did the cutting heads part. That was really cool.
Yeah, I couldn't. The suspension of belief there that you had to go through to believe that Ralph Macchio could beat Steve Vai was too much for me. But no, Steve Vai was in Whitesnake.
The suspension of belief that Ralph Macchio could play guitar was a little bit.
Yeah, every time you see him play, they do the close up of the guitar, and it's Steve Vai's hands.
Yeah,
so they pull back, it's Ralph Macchio's face.
Yeah, right, exactly. But Steve Macchio did play all of the classical pieces in that, and obviously played all the stuff he did. So
Steve Macchio? Did
I say Steve Macchio?
You did. You did a Chernobyl where you blended the two of them together. It's some radioactive mutant.
Ralph Macchio wishes he could play like that.
Yeah.
Now, Ry Cooder did all the blues licks, I believe, and pretty sure Steve Vai did the classical parts, even what Ralph Macchio's character was doing in the movie, I think. So I have the soundtrack to the movie. I mean, I'm a big Steve Vai fan. Got a bunch of his solo stuff.
Well, if you pick up Whitesnake's Slip of the Tongue, you'll have another Steve Vai album.
He was on that one,
He
really?
was definitely on that one.
I may actually have to go buy that album now.
Yeah, Steve Vai on his time in Whitesnake. 3 decades after its release, Vai takes you inside the making of Whitesnake's Slip of the Tongue, the album that sent the band into uncharted territory.
All right. Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
I guess I'm not that big of a Steve Vai fan if I didn't know
I guess
that.
not.
All right, man. Well, do you have anything else for the news? And of course, listeners, we're only doing one news story each now. You can support us now on Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/cosmic sponge, one word. And you can, help support the show, because as much as Jimmy and I love doing this thing, it is not free to produce. And we have monthly costs. We're not begging for money here, but at the same time,
Sounds
we really
like it.
appreciate some support. Did I sound like a
little bit
like channel? What is it? The National Public. What is it?
National Public Radio when they do their drives. Yeah. It's like, come on, please give us money.
It's like, hurry up with the story, man. NPR, right? NPR, and then
if you just want to be part of the community and help us grow the show, we have some extra goodies over there to give you in exchange for helping us grow the show and build it out and make something a little bit bigger and hopefully special.
Right. And one of those available to all levels of Patreon support is the Weird Wonder Show, which we just finished reporting, which was a couple extra news stories each and comments.
Some good
For all
comments.
of you that are helping us out, we really appreciate it. And let's move on with tonight's main topic, the Bermuda Triangle, the mysteries surrounding this stretch of water. Jimmy, I know you've done some legwork on this one. What you got for me on the Bermuda Triangle?
In 1964, pulp fiction writer Vincent Gaddis introduced the world to the Bermuda Triangle, this mysterious, paranormal area located in the Atlantic Ocean and taking on the shape of the dumbest concert band instrument ever, graced the cover of Argosy, a magazine of adventure and weirdness produced through liberal consumption of psychedelic chewables. This terrifying and dangerous carnival and Royal Caribbean getaway is roughly defined by drawing a triangle using Florida, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda as its vertices. Strange weather, magnetic interference, missing vessels, and the loss of human life to the tune of Margaritaville provides a terrifying canvas on which stories of sea monsters, alternative dimensions, UFOs, and Elvis sightings exploding on the canvas with each brushstroke from the likes of artists just like Mr. Vincent Gaddis. In this episode, we dive into the murky waters of the Devil's Triangle in search of the cause of over 2,000 missing ships and over 200 missing planes, starting with the case of the little planes that could. But first, some facts and history behind this Triangle of Doom. It's theorized that Atlantis might be beneath the waters. Compasses go wild here. This is the feeding waters of the Kraken and large sea serpents. There's apparently a alternate dimensional door here, which sucks in all the ships that get close to it. Odd storms and electrical effects are known to warp time. And this is also the place where Gilligan and his crew were lost. Do you have any other facts or interesting tidbits, Steve, of the Bermuda
SS
Triangle?
Minnow went missing in the Bermuda Triangle?
Yeah, I always thought so.
I mean, it was a 3-hour tour.
How did that island, it was like a dimensional door. How did they never find people on that island? How did nobody ever find them? I mean, every once in a while somebody'd come along, but I just figured that some of those people in the Bermuda Triangle got sucked into the dimension. Pocket dimension.
It could be. I mean, that could be what the mystery was the the whole Bermuda Triangle thing. And I just clicked off one of my main topics.
Better not hum that. Probably get like a strike for Gilligan's Island.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Just sit right back in your head, tell of a fitful trip. Started from this tropic port aboard this tiny ship. Jimmy and I both have a couple of pretty major incidents that we want to cover, but I thought I would cover just a few of the more famous ones. And in fact, each one of these could probably be an episode in its own. Who knows? One of these days we may decide to cover this a little more in depth. The first recorded instance of strange happenings in the Bermuda Triangle area was when Thomas Lynch Jr. and his wife disappeared while sailing to the West Indies in 1779. Lynch was a representative from South Carolina and one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. In 1909, Joshua Slocum was on his ship, the Spray. He was known for his skills on the water. He was the first man to complete a solo sailing mission around the world. He was on his way from the Caribbean to Venezuela in 1909 and disappeared. Now, there's no direct evidence to suggest he disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle, but, for paranormal people, close enough. Now, there is the Star Angel and the Star Ariel. These two aircraft disappeared just about a year apart from each other. The Tiger, with 29 people on board on January 30th, 1948, and the Ariel with 20 people on board January 17th, 1949. Neither plane gave out a distress call of any sort, and nothing was ever seen. Now, wreckage of a plane owned by the same company as Tiger and Ariel turned up in the Andes in 1998. But so far, no one knows if that's the same plane, but there's a lot of speculation about it. The alleged sinking of the HMS Atalanta, the crew of 281 died when this 26-gun British frigate went missing after leaving Bermuda for Falmouth, England in 1880. So, disappeared, I guess. The SS Cotopaxi, in December 1925, the Cotopaxi was heading for Havana from Charleston, South Carolina, when it disappeared. The ship's captain radioed shortly before it was lost and said there was water in the hold. So there seems to be little doubt that it probably sank along with all 32 crew members. You remember the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind? Mm-hmm. They find this ship in the desert, in the Gobi Desert or something, right?
Right, yeah.
Part of the Bermuda Triangle thing. But actually, this ship has been found. It's not in this article, but hang on one second, because very recently they did find the wreckage of this ship. Cotopaxi. Yeah, it was discovered 35 nautical miles off St. Augustine, Florida. She was discovered in the 1980s but could not be identified, subsequently dubbed the Bear Wreck. Cotopaxi was identified in January 2020 based on 15 years of investigation by marine biologist Michael Barnett. So that mystery is somewhat solved. It's not in the Gobi Desert, I guess.
Darn it. That would be cool.
Yeah. The Marine Sulphur Queen was a tanker ship carrying sulfur. It was going from Beaumont, Texas to Norfolk, Virginia, but never made it. A completely normal radio message was sent from the tanker on February 4th, 1963, and by February 6th, the ship was reported as missing. A total of 39 crew members were lost. The Marine Sulphur Queen's sister ship, Sylvia L. Asa, went down east of Bermuda in 1976. All that was ever found was some debris and an empty lifeboat.
Ooh.
The Carol A. Deering. The captain got sick and had to abandon ship while it was still in port in Delaware. This was apparently considered a bad omen after it had delivered its cargo. To Rio, the ship started to turn home and stopped in Barbados for supplies. Afterward, it was sighted near North Carolina, and observers noted that the crew was acting strange. The ship wasn't seen again until its wreckage washed up off the coast of Cape Hatteras. The ship's log, navigation equipment, and the crew's personal belongings and lifeboats were all gone. The Hewitt was lost in 1921 when it sailed from Sabine, Texas, bound for Portland, Maine. The captain made a regular radio call on January 25th, and it turned out to be his final communication. The last sighting was about 250 miles north of Jupiter Inlet, Florida. Not a trace of wreckage has ever been found, even after an extensive search along the route it was supposed to be traveling. Let us move on to what we believe is one of the more significant stories of this. Now, we could keep going on. I mean, there's tons of these on the internet you can find. Tons of these disappearances of ships and planes. But the Bermuda Triangle, when we start looking at the history of it, probably the one sighting, which I'll get into just a little bit later, that really got people talking and people writing these articles, as Jimmy had pointed out in the intro, was the disappearance of the 5 Navy Avengers, these Navy torpedo planes. This was right after the end of World War II. They were on a training mission and disappeared without a trace. To this day, they have never been found. And another plane had been dispatched to look for them, and it disappeared as well. So there was a few of these articles. There had been a little talk about the Bermuda Triangle since 1950, and a few articles had come out in different magazines, as Jimmy had pointed out. But the one thing that really put this phenomenon into the minds of America and really made it famous was a book that was published in 1974 by Charles Bertlitz, and it was just simply called The Bermuda Triangle. And there was another book published before his called Limbo of the Lost in 1969. But the Charles Bertlitz book, which later was made into a documentary to follow up on the book, that sold 20 million copies. So really that's when we started seeing the documentaries. As a kid growing up, I remember these Devil's Triangle, Bermuda Triangle stories being pretty popular back in those days. And there was another book by Richard Winter, also published in 1974, called The Devil's Triangle. Those are the things that really put it out there. Jimmy, I think you've got the story of the Cyclops. That's a pretty famous disappearance.
So when the USS Cyclops went off the grid somewhere north of Barbados, it became one of the most popular examples of the uncanny dangers lurking in the Bermuda Triangle. And the USS Cyclops was built in 1910, and it was a collier, or a coal carrier. It was steel-hulled and very large, about the size of a football field and a half in length. It was commonly used to transport either mineral ores or troops or both. It had a max speed of 15 knots, and this particular ship was commissioned to join the war effort for World War I in 1917. It stayed mostly, and the last part of its life before it disappeared, hauling mineral ores and troops up and down the East Coast and all the way down into South America, to and from South America. It had a carrying capacity of 8,000 tons. In this particular case, the ship left Rio de Janeiro on February 16th in 1918 and entered Salvador on the 20th of February. It then left there on the 22nd with a no-stop scheduled trip to Baltimore. It was considered that it was overloaded, and a report from the captain indicated that there was a cracked cylinder in the starboard engine and was inoperable. Because of this, it ended up making an additional stop in Barbados, because the water line was, in addition to the engine being damaged, the water line was over the Plimsoll mark line on the ship, which indicates the legal limit of submersion was exceeded in this case. So it had a carrying capacity of 8,000 tons, and it exceeded that by several thousand tons. It had 10,800 tons of manganese ore on board. Manganese was a heavier ore than what it normally carried as well. And the way it was distributed on the boat when it initially left, it was piled mostly in the center, not evenly distributed across the deck and within the hull. And part of that was due to the captain having sequestered one of the men who was senior in his cabins for some reason, and having a younger officer oversee the loading of the materials. We'll get back to that. It then set out for Baltimore on the 4th of March. It was sighted by the Molasses Tangier Amalco near Virginia. On March the 10th, a violent storm swept the area where the ship was last seen, and on June 1st, it was deemed lost. The captain of the Amalco said that he could not have possibly seen the ship and must have seen something else because of the time necessary for it to have reached that spot of the water from where it left in March the 4th to make it up there by March the 10th. It would have been unlikely.
It was a very distinct looking ship, though. I've seen pictures of it.
Right. So there are a lot of things about this that you need to take into account. The first thing is that the ship left with only one engine running, with more cargo than it should have had on board. It had 309 men on board, though when you look at the ship's logs, there was really 293, which included 15 officers and 221 crewmen. The last communication came as they cleared the Barbados port with a weather fair, all clear. The trip was supposed to go from March 4th to March 13th. By March 13th, they were supposed to be in the Chesapeake. It disappeared without a trace, and nothing was found anywhere.
And it's a very large ship.
No wreckage, no people, no oil spills, nothing.
It seems odd that there were so many people that there were no survivors. I mean, that is probably the greatest loss of life in one of these disappearances that we're talking about.
Outside of combat, it is the greatest loss of life that the Navy has ever suffered.
Wow.
Yeah. So there were several ideas that were floated about what could have happened to the ship. There were the more extraordinary claims that perhaps a giant octopus, the Kraken, could have taken the ship down.
Release the Kraken.
Release the Kraken. What's it, from the Titans?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Clash of the Titans.
Clash of the Titans. Release the Kraken. But some more sensible ideas, they even thought that maybe some German U-boats may have sunk it, because
that's definitely possible.
It was considered a very valuable asset, along with its three sister ships, which had the same design, the Jupiter, the Nereus, and the Proteus. All four of those ships sunk. The Jupiter was sunk by a Japanese aircraft that had bombed it. But the other two ships, much like the Cyclops, disappeared without a trace in the Atlantic, the Nereus and the Proteus. Both were carrying ore, and this led to some to consider the idea of a design flaw in the ships that caused the ships to sink. But then there was the what I like to call the shitty captain theory. So the captain, his name was George W. Worley, was actually not British. That sounds like a British name, right? George W. Worley.
Yeah.
His real name was Johann Friedrich Weichmann.
Oh, he was a German.
He was a German. And the people on his ship, the crew on his ship, did not like him. They called him the Dutchman. What did they call him?
No.
They called him something.
Could have been Dutch.
He wasn't Dutch. They called him the Dutchman because he was from Deutschland, and they mistook it for Dutch. And
Deutschland is German.
That's right. But the crew didn't know that. They heard Deutschland and thought it Dutch. So that's how he got the name as the Mad Dutchman. Not Mad. They called him the Damn Dutchman. He was really mean. He had this tendency to walk around the deck in his underwear with a hat and a cane. The officers and the crew hated him, and he was very vindictive. And for this particular trip on the ship, that's what caused the loading of the ore to be distributed incorrectly and too much of it loaded onto the ship. So he was born in Hanover, Sandstadt, Germany in 1862 and entered America by jumping ship in San Francisco. He changed his name to Worley in 1898. He then went into the military, serving in the reserves, and then eventually got this ship, the Cyclops, as the captain. So when they did a review of his records and they found out that this guy was actually a German, another interesting thing cropped up. Also on this ship, on this trip, was the American consul from Rio de Janeiro, Alfred Louis Morrow Gottschalk, who was also German and had pro-German sympathies during the war. So some floated the idea that there was actually, and there were some of the crew who were also German. So they thought that maybe they had stolen the ship and taken it to Germany. They even went so far as to research the German records after the war that they had captured, looking for any indication that that's what had happened. Because, like Steve said, no bodies showed up, no oil slicks, no wreckage at all. So many think that it was a casualty of the Bermuda Triangle.
Right. I think it's, I mean, maybe not, but probably likely that some type of records could have been found, I would think, if the Germans had captured that ship.
But none were found.
Usually, too, records are pretty good about ships that are sunk as well. I was doing just a little bit of research here while you were going through the Cyclops story, looking at U-boat activity off the American coast, and there was some late in the war. In April 18th, they captured the cruise right outside of Chesapeake, Virginia. They sank 6 U.S. ships, damaged 2 others off the coast of New Jersey. It's possible. I mean, they did make it their way all the way over here, but it's still very little activity. I don't see anything that happened around the Caribbean, mostly in the Northeast, which I think is where most of the shipping going toward England, which they were trying to stop with war goods and supplies and things for England, would have been their goal to sink those ships before any others. But where was the Cyclops bound for?
Baltimore.
Okay.
Now, it's really quite extraordinary that another ship claimed to have seen them on March 10th. And also on March 10th, in that area, a storm hit. Pretty significant storm hit in that area. Then in the 1960s, Dean Halls, a diver for a salvage company, was searching for a different wreck. And he came upon a very unusual wreck that had all of the hallmarks of the Cyclops. But at the time, he didn't know what it was. He just noticed it was a very unusual looking ship. He noted it in his logbook and came up and had planned to get another bit of his crew to come with him to go down and get a better look, but heavy seas forced them to abandon that dive. The Navy, who was paying for the ship they were looking for, had to be convinced that they would pay to have him go back down to look at this different wreck. And eventually they did, once Halls had identified it as the Cyclops from a picture he just happened upon. It's like, that's the ship I was on. It had, these unusual arms coming up off the deck, and I guess that was for loading the coal. And then it had the steel beams coming up around the edges.
Yeah.
He's like, that's what I saw. So he did get them to eventually go and look again, but they weren't able to find it. They found 2 other wrecks in that direct area, but it wasn't the wreck that Halls had seen. So he's convinced that it's a case where the Cyclops missed the entrance to the Chesapeake Bay and continued on north in the storm and then capsized.
Right, from it being overloaded, improperly loaded, and one engine malfunctioning and not even working.
Yeah.
I know one of the cylinders in the engine was damaged.
Right. So it didn't even collapse. If that is what happened, then it didn't sink even anywhere near the Bermuda Triangle.
Maybe we'll find it someday. I think they've practically mapped the entire ocean floor. I know there's a lot of wrecks out there. I guess they just haven't had the funding or means to examine them all or try to determine what they are.
My favorite part about this whole story is that a German in his underwear wearing a hat and a cane is pacing up and down the ship. All of you will do what I say. You will do now. Alles ist verboten.
It's like the plot thickens. I mean, there's all kinds of weird things about this story. Well, let's move on to probably the most famous Bermuda Triangle story that I'm sure most listeners have heard about, and that is the Navy's Flight 19. So on December 5th, 1945, there were 5 Navy TBM Avenger torpedo bombers. Flight 19 undertook a routine navigation and combat training exercise. The assignment was called Navigation Problem Number 1, a combination of bombing and navigation which other flights had completed or were scheduled to undertake later that day. The flight leader was a United States Navy Lieutenant Charles Carroll Taylor, who had about 2,500 flying hours, mostly in aircraft of this type, while his trainee pilots each had 300 total and 60 flight hours in the Avenger. Taylor had completed a combat tour in the Pacific Theater as a torpedo bomber pilot on the aircraft carrier the USS Hancock and had recently arrived from NAS Miami, where he had also been a torpedo bombing plane instructor. The student pilots had recently completed other training missions in the area where the flight was to take place. Their call signs were Fox-Terre. As we talk about this, all of these training flights, and there were different flights besides Flight 19, they all were FT something, FT-36 or FT-117 or whatever. So it was the Grumman TBF Avengers, pretty famous airplane, late war aircraft. First saw service in 1943. Each aircraft was fully fueled. When they were going through all their pre-flight checks, it was discovered they were all missing clocks. Navigation of the route was intended to teach dead reckoning principles, which involved calculating, among other things, the elapsed time. The apparent lack of timekeeping equipment was not a cause of concern, however, because it was assumed that each man had his own watch. Takeoff was scheduled for 13:45 local time, but the late arrival of Taylor delayed departure until 14:10. Weather at NAS Fort Lauderdale was described as favorable, sea state moderate to rough. Taylor was supervising the mission, and a trainee pilot had the role of leader out front. The navigation problem number 1 involved 3 different legs, but the actual flight should have flown 4. After takeoff, they flew a heading of 91 degrees, almost due east for 56 nautical miles, until reaching Hen and Chickens Shoals.
Hen and Chickens? How can you get lost with
I think it's a precursor to KFC. I think they were stopping by the drive-thru to pick up some lunch, where a low-level bombing practice was carried out. The flight was to continue on that heading for another 67 nautical miles before turning onto a course of 346 degrees for 73 nautical miles, in the process overflying Grand Bahama Island. The next scheduled turn was to a heading of 241 degrees to fly 120 nautical miles, at the end of which the exercise was completed and the Avengers would turn left and then return to NAS Fort Lauderdale.
That seems pretty straightforward.
That's the mission.
Until you hear one of the guys say, hey, this watch I got, the guy said it was a Rolex, but it's not working. I paid $1.50 for it.
It says Bolex on it, man.
It's Bolex. What the hell?
Radio conversations between the pilots were overheard by the base and other aircraft in the area. The practice bombing operation is known to have been carried out because at about 1500, a pilot requested and was given permission to drop his last bomb. 40 minutes later, another flight instructor, Robert F. Cox in FT-74, who was forming up with his group of students for the same mission, received an unidentified transmission. An unidentified member asked Powers, one of the students, for his compass heading. Powers replied, "I don't know where we are. We must have got lost after that last turn." Cox then transmitted, "This is FT-74, plane or boat calling. Powers, please identify yourself so someone can help you." Now, this is another training flight that's getting ready to go out and do the same thing that this training flight just did. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
FT-74. The response after a few moments was a request from the others in the flight or suggestions. FT-74 tried again, and a man identified as FT-28, who was Taylor, came on. "FT-28, this is FT-74. What is your trouble?" "Both of my compasses are out," Taylor replied, "and I am trying to find Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I am over land, but it's broken. I am sure I'm in the Keys, but I don't know how far down, and I don't know how to get to Fort Lauderdale." All right, now, I want to point out something here. If he was over the Florida Keys from Fort Lauderdale, they were due to fly directly east, okay? And then turn north, fly over the Bahamas, and then fly left, okay? Like fly back west, right? Kind of in a triangular pattern.
Like a Bermuda Triangle pattern.
Right. But if he was over the Florida Keys, he would have been way
Way
off
off.
course.
Yeah.
Way off course. I mean, the Keys go from like Miami and swing west and south from there.
Yeah, there's that cool
for
bridge
whatever-
you drive over, too. He should have been able to see that bridge that blew up in that one movie that James Cameron did.
Oh, yeah. And
True Lies. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if there was a road bridge in those days. I know there was a railroad bridge in those days. For sure.
So he should have been able
Yeah.
to see that.
Well, anyway, that's for whatever reason, he thought he was, I guess, hundreds of miles off course. FT-74, which that's the other flight, informed the NAS that the aircraft were lost, then advised Taylor to put the sun on his port wing and fly north up the coast to Fort Lauderdale. Base operations then asked if the flight leader's aircraft was equipped with a standard YG. Now, that's an IFF transmitter, like a transponder in today's thing. It's like a transmitter. It's going to show you the location of the aircraft. Wanted to know if it was on, if he had one, and if it was activated. But instead, FT-28, which is Taylor, radioed back, said, "We are heading 30 degrees for 45 minutes. Then we will fly north to make sure we are not over the Gulf of Mexico. During this time, no bearings could be made on the flight, and the IFF could not be picked up." Taylor was told to broadcast at 4805 kilohertz. This order was not acknowledged, so he was asked to switch to frequency 3000 kilohertz, the search and rescue frequency. Taylor replied, "I cannot switch frequencies. I must keep my planes intact." At 1656, Taylor was again asked to turn on his transmitter for the YG. Again, that's the IFF transmitter, the locator. He did not acknowledge, but a few minutes later advised his flight, change course 90 degrees due east for 10 minutes. About the same time, someone in the flight said, "Damn it, if we could just fly west, we would get home. Head west, damn it." This difference of opinion later led to questions about why the students did not simply head west on their own, but it's been explained that this can obviously be attributed to military discipline. I mean, they were the trainees. He was in charge of the flight. So it sounds like at this point, at least one of the students knew they were not over the Florida Keys and that this guy was way off. Why he thought he was so far south and to the west is unknown. But obviously some of the students knew, let's fly west and we'll get to Florida. Maybe not exactly where we need to be, but we'll make it to land, right? As the weather deteriorated, radio contact became intermittent, and it was believed that 5 aircraft by this point were more than 200 miles out to sea of the Florida Peninsula. Taylor radioed, "We'll fly 270 degrees west until landfall or running out of gas," and requested weather check at 1724. By 1750, several land-based radio stations had triangulated Flight 19's position as being within 100 nautical miles radius of 29 degrees and 79 degrees west. Flight 19 was north of the Bahamas and well off course, well off the coast of Central Florida, but nobody transmitted this information in the open on a repetitive basis. At 1804, Taylor radioed his flight, "Holding 270, we didn't fly far enough east. We may as well turn around and fly east again." By that time, the weather had deteriorated even more and the sun had set. Around 1820, Taylor's last message was received. It has also been reported that Taylor's last message was received at 1904. A little bit of a discrepancy there. He was heard saying, "All planes close up tight. We'll have to ditch unless landfall. When the first plane drops below 10 gallons, we will all go down together." That was it. Once it became obvious that the flight was lost, all the air bases, aircraft, merchant ships were all alerted. A consolidated PBY Catalina departed around 1800 to search for Flight 19 and to hopefully guide them back if they could be located. After dark, 2 PBM Mariner flying boats, originally scheduled for their own training flights, were diverted to perform square pattern searches in the area that they were believed to have disappeared in. One of them, PBM Number 5, Buno 59225, took off at 1927 from Naval Air Station Banana River, called in a routine radio mission at 1930 and was never heard from again. At 21:15, the tanker SS Gaines Mills reported it had observed flames from an apparent explosion leaping 100 feet high and burning for 10 minutes at the position of 28.59 north, 80.25 degrees west, Captain Shona Stanley reported unsuccessfully searching for survivors through a pool of oil and aviation gasoline. The escort carrier, the USS Solomons, also reported losing radar contact with the aircraft at the same position and time. So really what it sounds like was Flight 19. For whatever reason, Taylor got lost. He thought he was over the Florida Keys, when in reality, he was most likely still flying over the Bahamas where he was supposed to be. They dispatched 2 of these PBM-5 Mariners, and one of them disappears, but most likely exploded in some kind of accident. So that just added to the whole mystery of the Flight 19 disappearance. Now, the one ship found remains near where they saw the explosion. That most likely was the flying boat, but no trace of those 5 Navy Avengers have ever been found.
Wow. I did read something about this. Wasn't that flying search and rescue boat? It's not a boat, right? It's a plane.
Flying boat.
Flying boat.
I mean, it's an airplane designed to land and take off on water.
Didn't they nickname that the flying gas can? Because they had a tendency to explode.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I'd read that somewhere. I'm pretty sure that's what they called it. What type of ship was it? Martin PBM Mariner. It made me laugh. I'd read that somewhere in one of those books about this case. Now, I had also read that Taylor was, 2 things about his character was, one, he had gotten lost before. And the second thing that I had read that I remember is that he had been caught drinking before on some of his flight and had a hangover on that particular day.
And he was late.
Yeah,
he was almost 30 minutes late. Oh, they were called flying gas tanks because they tended to leak fumes.
Flying gas tanks, that's what it was, yeah.
Some of these aircraft in World War II were hastily designed and put in the air. PB-wise the Catalina was very, very popular and very successful aircraft.
We got to get this thing out of here fast. Only do every other rivet.
Yeah, something like that. During the war, they designed and sometimes bought these aircraft right off the drawing board.
Yeah.
I mean, they went right into production before. Normally, there'll be a series of prototypes built and hand-built, and all the designs, everything is checked out, often for 2 or 3 years before an aircraft goes into production to make sure any unforeseen problems can be ironed out. But during World War II, they obviously didn't have time, the great need for many different kinds of aircraft, and sometimes there were problems that didn't emerge until after they were already in service.
Captain, this plane's gonna leak fuel like nobody's business. We shouldn't fly it. That's all right, son. Just put up a no smoking sign.
Yeah, and it's the 1940s, right?
Right. I'll smoke if I wanna.
Right. So let's think about this. So this one is I would say, wouldn't you say this is probably the most popular or the most well-known disappearance?
It's the first one I ever heard of with a Bermuda Triangle was this on television in the 70s.
Yeah. So, and obviously they always talk about this disappearance because it's not just one plane or one ship or a civilian ship or plane. This is 5 Navy Avenger aircraft. The leader of this flight had done this sort of thing before, had over 2,500 hours of flying experience. But all indications really look like he got lost. I mean, based on the radio transmissions. The fact that they didn't find anything, I don't know that that's so mysterious. Things get lost in the ocean because it's so vast. You know, when you're flying over it, I mean, it just looks like water. So how do you find something if it's already sunk out of sight? You hopefully find men floating around, you know, in life jackets or on rubber rafts or something like that, but nothing was ever found of these men. Let's look at some of the possible causes. What's going on in the Bermuda Triangle that's creating all these disappearances?
Well, you know, compasses are really important when you're in open water, and if they're not working correctly, it's easy to get lost. And if you're in a plane, it's really bad, right? Because eventually you're going to run out of fuel.
Yeah, and there are no landmarks. I mean, unless you fly over one of these islands or something. But for the most part, when you're out in the ocean, everything looks the same from horizon to horizon.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what they used in those days, long before GPS and any other electronic navigation aids. They would use dead reckoning, which was your compass heading and looking at your watch, right? Hey, I'm going to fly 20 minutes in this direction in this compass heading, and I should be here, right?
Correct.
If you're not there, it's like, and obviously some of those students knew
Something
they were
was
in
off.
the right place. So
Yeah.
who knows about, why did that guy think he was all the way down in the Florida Keys? I mean, that is a long way from Fort Lauderdale. And they flew out east. They weren't even flying in that direction.
And, well, he'd hit the bottle pretty heavy, I guess, and maybe he also, topped it off with some heroin. Who knows? I mean, I'm not saying that's what happened, but who knows? But problems with compasses still happen in the Bermuda Triangle, even today, from time to time, going back as far as Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus had a entry in his logs where he had problems with his compass and saw a bright object in the sky come down over the water and light up everything, which is pretty extraordinary. Now, when I dug down into this a little bit deeper, just trying to get to the bottom of what could possibly cause compasses to malfunction, and there's two things that are relevant to the Bermuda Triangle. The first is that if you understand how a compass works, it doesn't point to true north. There is magnetic north and true north. True north is the geographic top of the world, and then magnetic north is a point that's offset by that by a couple of 1,000 miles, 100 miles, I don't know, but there's an offset there, and that's where the compass points to. It's Earth's magnetic field toward the top to the North Pole. All compasses point to that. The difference between true north and magnetic north is called declination, and it moves a couple of degrees every year. And it's not a constant movement. Now, at any given point in time, the true north and magnetic north, depending on where you are in the world, line up precisely. And if you don't know that, and you're taking a compass reading, and you have your declination set improperly, then you're going to get a reading that isn't accurate. And even a couple of degrees over a very short distance can really put you far off, and a longer distance, a couple 100 miles, and it can put you really far off. So that's one thing. The other thing is that Bermuda is actually the remnants of an underwater volcano. And when it erupted a huge amount of material, which was really high in magnetic iron. There's a mineral called magnetite that is in a thick layer around certain areas all through the Bermuda Triangle. And even up at the surface, it impacts, depending on where you are, can impact compass readings and make them just spin wildly. So that's another thing that may impact navigation abilities within the Bermuda Triangle. May contribute
Well, that's
to
pretty
these
interesting.
things. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd read that before where they said it's one of the few places on Earth that it coincides, geographical north coincides with the magnetic north, or the one place on Earth that actually coincides. There's another explanation of why ships may just suddenly disappear and sink in the Bermuda Triangle. One is methane hydrates. Have you heard about this one?
I have, and it's the one that freaks me out the most.
For one thing, the Bermuda, the seafloor, they're kind of active with volcanoes and underwater earthquakes. There's this geological phenomena this is totally hypothetical, but that there's methane hydrates that are highly flammable, crystal-like compounds. They can get trapped below the ocean floor. And so if there's one of these underwater earthquakes going on, then this methane gas erupts from all these hydrates, and it starts floating up to the surface. Well, what it does is it lowers the density of water. I mean, if you think about it, a boat is just floating on top of the water because it depends on the density of water, the cohesion of water, the tendency of water molecules to stick together. That's why you have raindrops, right? Why you have little pools of water when you spill your glass, and it all kind of pools together because water has this cohesive property. If you build the hole deep enough, big enough, you can float anything, right? Even things that aren't
lightweight materials.
Made of material that floats, like wood, right? You can make a steel battleship.
Right.
The idea of this is that these hydrates come up and lower the density of the water. And so then the water becomes much less dense, and then the ship just sinks and literally just sinks straight down. It's like all these bubbles come up, the cohesiveness of water is gone, and it's as if it's just dropping in the air, and it just sinks straight down. So that's one theory.
Theoretical, sure.
Theoretical. There's never been any proof of it. I have seen demonstrations of it, though, where they'll simulate those methane hydrates, and they'll have it in, say, a model in a tank, and then just release all of this methane hydrates. And sure enough, man, that's the model ship will sink, bam, to the bottom of the tank in like half a second. Just goes straight down.
So have you heard about air bombs?
Well, don't know. I'm not sure.
We have satellites now which give us a bird's eye view, actually a bird in a spacesuit eye view of planet Earth now.
Okay.
They captured some cloud formations over Bermuda, which were very unusual in that they had a perfect hexagonal shape. And there were several of these. And they weren't really sure what to make of it, but clouds don't normally form that way. They were trying to figure out what was going on there, so they started looking at other maps from other locations around the world to see if they could find something comparable. And they found it in the North Sea, and it was more prevalent there. And how often it showed up was enough so that another satellite equipped with radar allowed them to see beneath the clouds to see what was going on weather-wise below the cloud line. And they discovered that there were microbursts occurring within those hexagonal shapes, dropping air at such a force that it would cause 45-foot waves and wind up to 175 miles an hour.
Oh, wow. So sort of like the rogue wave theory.
Exactly.
It just suddenly capsizes a ship and it's gone, engulfs a ship or something.
Right. They believe actually that these rogue waves may be caused by interactions of those 45-foot waves clashing up against each other and building, and then causing waves that may be up to 100 feet in height and just swamping boats.
That would swamp nearly anything.
Right.
And of course, one other theory of what could cause all these disappearances is, of course, the lost continent of Atlantis. And some people think it's some lost technology, maybe creating a vortex that sucks things out of existence down there. There's theories range from aliens. Maybe it's a hot spot for flying saucers to come and abduct people for study. And we saw that in the Close Encounters, right? In the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, at the very beginning of the movie, they find the 5 Navy Avenger aircraft in a desert somewhere. I think it's the Gobi Desert. Check all the serial numbers, and sure enough, it's Flight 19, and these aircraft are in pristine condition as if they had just taken off, right? And then at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, but the movie's like 40 years old now, but at the end of the movie, the airmen are all returned to Earth and, of course, haven't aged a day. And the line is, Einstein was right. Einstein was probably one of them.
It's so lame.
Hey, he probably was one of them.
You
probably
think?
Not. No.
No. He's a clever,
I think Einstein
German.
was right, though. I do believe in relativity because it's proven fact.
At least some of it.
But
it's incomplete.
Not general relativity is not incomplete.
Well, it's incomplete. Yeah, it's incomplete at a quantum level.
Oh, well. You start talking about quantum physics, man, then you get into...
Woo.
That is some weird wonders in the world.
That is the weird wonder in the world. Let's
look at this phenomenon, though. Let's look at it, I guess, in a bit of a skeptical sense. As we pointed out, the idea of the Bermuda Triangle grew out of in 1964, the article, The Deadly Bermuda Triangle in Argosy, as Jimmy had pointed out earlier, saying Flight 19 and other disappearances were part of a pattern of strange events in the region. He expanded that into a book, Invisible Horizons. Other writers elaborated on this, but the one book by Charles Berlitz, The Bermuda Triangle in 1974, was what really got the idea going, and also The Devil's Triangle, written by Richard Winter. Larry Lush wrote a book called The Bermuda Triangle Mystery Solved in 1975, He argued that many of the claims that Gaddis and some of the other writers had were exaggerated, dubious, or unverifiable.
Exaggerated?
His research revealed that a number of inaccuracies and inconsistencies in Berlitz's accounts and statements from eyewitnesses, participants, and others involved in the initial incidents were not accurate.
No, you don't say.
He noticed there were some cases where pertinent information went unreported, such as the disappearance of the round-the-world yachtsman Donald Crowhurst, which Berlitz had presented as a mystery despite clear evidence to the contrary. Kirsch argued that a large percentage of the incidents that sparked the allegations of the mysterious triangle actually occurred outside of it. But he laid out some ideas here of why we see these kind of disappearances in the triangle. One is the number of ships and aircraft reported missing in the area is not significantly higher, proportionally speaking, than in any other part of the world. Planes and ships that go missing in the Bermuda Triangle are no different than the planes and ships that go missing in the Pacific Ocean somewhere, right? It's a very well-traveled area, for one thing.
I looked into that a little bit and found out that the Bermuda Triangle area doesn't even rate in the top 10 most dangerous waters on planet Earth. That claim actually goes to the Pacific and specifically to the South China Sea. I don't know what's going on there, and also the North Sea and the Black Sea.
You know what you need to do is write the Black Sea Triangle book.
I'm going to.
Yeah, I'll do the South China Sea Triangle book. The area is frequented by tropical cyclones. The number of disappearances that did occur were, for the most part, neither disproportionate, unlikely, nor mysterious. In other words, some of them disappeared in bad weather. A lot of writers often failed to mention that such storms were even present, or the disappearance had happened in calm conditions when meteorological records clearly contradict this.
Yeah, that's where a lot of cruise ships go. I can't imagine they would intentionally send their customers off into dangerous and their expensive assets into something that's going to have a crack and pull them underwater, or a Atlantean time portal, zip them into another place of time, put them in the Gobi Desert. It's like, wouldn't that suck?
Right.
You're in your cruise and you end up in the Gobi Desert. You're like, man, this sucks.
Yeah. Well, I thought it'd be wetter.
Where are the beaches? It's nothing but beach.
And in fact, in some of in one incident in his book, this is what Kush had pointed out about Berkelitz's book, said that there was a plane crash that was said to have taken place in 1937 off Daytona Beach in Florida in front of hundreds of witnesses, and he checked all of the local papers and found absolutely nothing for that date. In other words, it never happened. I mean, it obviously would have been reported in the newspaper.
Yeah. If I'm the book editor, I'm like, no, this isn't going to sell. Nothing happened in the Bermuda Triangle. Make some shit up.
Right. Those are some of the things to think about when you look at that. I mean, obviously, when we look at these, and I hate to be, someone who always, when we dig into these things, you want to find the real mystery there. But often these writers, and when you watch these shows on television, I mean, a lot of these things are just made up, or they leave out very pertinent information. I mean, just like the Cyclops disappearing, it had engine damage.
Cargo that was put on incorrectly.
That ship may be split in two and sank to the bottom of the ocean, and there was bad weather there.
And there was a captain that walked around in his underwear going things like, "Alles ist verboten."
Right.
Was ist falsch mit dir?
Yeah, another important thing to point out is that Lloyd's of London, who is a very famous insurance firm, which, statistically an insurance company is going to
maximize profits and not go risky endeavors.
If some place is dangerous, or there's a real danger of it disappearing without a trace, the cargo, the ships, whatever, they have no bearing whatsoever on the Bermuda Triangle. Their records indicate that it's no more dangerous there than most other places in the world in the ocean. There's nothing there. There's no reason to believe that their cargo or their ship that they insure is going to disappear there. And Coast Guard records also coincide with that. The Coast Guard says there's no greater danger in the Bermuda Triangle than there is outside of the Bermuda Triangle. I mean, The disappearances, the shipwrecks, the plane disappearances, all those things, there's nothing about it that's extraordinary in that area.
Yeah, which is the perfect cover for an underground UFO base.
Right. Exactly.
So I think we beat this one to death.
Well, I do have one last story for you.
Ooh, I hope it's a good one.
I have one last story.
Is this one that keeps the mystery going?
This is one that's going to keep a little mystery going.
Sweet.
So there was a pilot. His name is Bruce Gernon, and he had 2 passengers on board, which were his business partner and his father. Was scheduled to fly from the Bahamas to the Florida coast on December 4th, 1970, in a single-engine aircraft, a Beechcraft Bonanza. Bruce had made this journey a number of times from the Bahamas to Florida, back and forth. He never encountered any problems. The journey from the Bahamas to Florida usually took 1.5 hours, so the flight took off and was gaining altitude. As soon as the plane reached an altitude of 10,000 feet, Bruce saw a dark cloud ahead. As the plane was approaching the cloud was getting gigantic every minute. Bruce managed to cut through it and to come out of it. But this was not the end. As the aircraft reached 11,000 feet, Bruce saw another massive dark cloud. The pilot had no choice but to move through the cloud again. But when Bruce entered inside the second cloud, the surrounding was pitch black. No single ray of sun was passing through the cloud. And before, remember, the weather was pretty normal for that day. There was no rain, no thunderstorms. So these clouds seemingly appeared out of nowhere. Bruce was confused about why he was witnessing these black clouds. He then witnessed a blaze of light. Bruce straight away knew these were not lightning strikes that lit up the whole space inside of his aircraft. Bruce kept on flying, but the cloud never seemed to end. The pilot thought this may be the time that he dies. To his surprise, he saw a small light which marked the exit of the cloud. He kept the flight straight, started moving fast towards the end. All of a sudden, he witnessed strange activities taking place around him. The exit hole was getting shorter, and the entire electrical instrument inside the aircraft was unworkable. Bruce no longer had control of the aircraft. It was moving with the help of an unnatural force. Bruce did not lose hope and was determined to get out of the cloud tunnel. As he came out of the tunnel, the flight felt completely weightless for 5 seconds. As soon as the flight reached its normal state and Bruce regained consciousness, he immediately contacted the ground control. Bruce wanted to know his location. The ground team was unable to fetch him. The location of the flight was not showing up on radar. Bruce realized that he had already reached Miami, Florida, but how is this possible? The flight speed of 180 kilometers per hour, and there is no explaining how this aircraft had just made the trip in 45 minutes. The plane had a clean landing in Miami, and Bruce was eager to solve this mystery. In other words, this pilot was setting out to make an 1.5-hour trip with 2 passengers, flew into these dark clouds that appeared to be a tunnel or vortex or something. He flew out of the end of it, and then once he realized what his position was or called the tower, he was already there, and it only took 45 minutes. So he seemingly traveled through time or went through some kind of space warp or something.
Well, I was thinking when I read this story that perhaps he was just confused about the time. Maybe he saw wrong, but he also checked his fuel levels, and his fuel levels indicated that he had made it there with much less fuel than he would have expected to have in the thing. It was almost, over halfway full with the fuel, and he should have been way below that for a normal trip.
Yeah.
So that is
indeed
really weird.
A true mystery of the Bermuda Triangle.
Right. So case isn't 100% solved.
I think that there may be something strange going on there from time to time. I think the majority of disappearances, including Flight 19 and the Cyclops, I believe, were just mishaps. And then they just disappeared and sank under the waves. It's almost impossible to find, especially a small aircraft. In the vastness of the ocean, they didn't know where he was exactly. I mean, they lost many of the Malaysian Airlines.
Yeah.
And I mean, it has black boxes and electronics and all kinds of stuff to try and find it. They never found that plane either. Oh, and one thing we forgot to mention, the Gulf Stream runs right through there. So it's like a giant river in the ocean.
Right.
That will help sweep things away like debris and all that stuff. So I think most of them could probably be explained as just, they sank or disappeared, had engine trouble, what have you. But I do think there's some strange mysteries there from time to time, just like this one.
Yeah, that is one of the fun, creepy ones.
Yeah, for sure. All right, man. Do you have anything else on the Bermuda Triangle, Jimmy?
No, I feel perfectly comfortable doing a cruise there.
Right, the Bermuda. Actually, I saw that when I was doing this research. You can actually book a tour of the Bermuda Triangle. Like they call it like the Bermuda Triangle cruise or something.
Yeah, how dangerous can it be if you can have box wine and go on a cruise that goes to each point of the Bermuda Triangle? Sounds like fun, though. Bermuda, Puerto Rico, Miami. Hey, what's not to like?
Well, yeah, what's not to like? How could it go wrong?
I want to do a Bermuda Disney cruise.
There you go.
If somebody's going to get lost here, it's going to be Donald.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's before we get out of here, I'd like to remind everyone to please rate and review the podcast. It helps other people find the show. Our webpage is cosmicsponge.com. There you can find all the episodes of all of our previous shows and some other things. Jimmy does some nice write-ups on all the episodes. There's ways to support the show. You can support us on Patreon now. Go to patreon.com/cosmicsponge. Contact information is firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. Check us out on Instagram. And by the way, I caught up on all your Instagrams today. They're pretty funny.
Cool. I got the cannibal
ones. Check us out on Instagram. Check us out on Instagram and Facebook. Most of the news stories we cover, we also post on Facebook, including the ones that we do on the Weird Wonders show that are for our Patreon listeners exclusively. And YouTube. We're on YouTube.
We are. We are indeed on YouTube.
In fact, some people right now are listening on YouTube. So thank you for all the listeners out there. And we're seeing another little spike in growth again. So if you're new to the show, welcome. I hope you like what you heard. Jimmy, did I leave anything out?
You never do.
Well, this is Stephen Hawk signing out, and we'll see you next week.
Jimmy Cole, keep your eyes to the skies and your feet on the ground. Catch you next week. That's all for this week's episode of Cosmic Sponge. Please don't forget to rate and review us wherever you listen. It helps others find the show. If you have any questions or have a story you'd like to share, you can contact us using our email account at firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. If you'd like to support the show, consider becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/cosmicsponge, where you get access to exclusive content, including our Weird Wonders news and stories released every week. To explore everything Cosmic Sponge has to offer, including other ways to support the show, head on over to our website at www.cosmicsponge.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.